Welcome back to another episode of Freethinkers Anonymous. We're going to continue our journey talking about the VFX industry.
So now kind of comparing a typical film job to a VFX artist job. So for a film job, when you're working on a movie, so you're a gaffer or a grip, where you're doing like electrical work or lighting work, setting up tripods and that type of thing, or if you're a cinematographer, or also known as a director of photography or DP, if you're a scripty, if you're a producer, whatever it is, you start the day generally around 5 to 7 a.m. You have catered meals every single day. They're generally going to be pretty nice meals and they're going to be hot meals. They do generally have long days, 10 hours or so, but it's pretty much never going to go over 12 hours. They have union reps to enforce that it doesn't go over 12 hours. You're not going to be required to do anything dangerous unless like that's your job, like a stunt actor. But union reps will make sure as an actor, if there is any danger whatsoever, you are going to be protected. And that happens with any number of things. If there is any kind of a weapon on set, everyone circles around that weapon. It is fully demonstrated that it is a prop weapon, the way that it works, the way that it doesn't work, that you never do certain things with those weapons. Even if it's a plastic knife, or like a syringe that doesn't even have a needle in it yet. Those are the kind of things that they will be very careful that people understand. This is something that could hurt you in the real world, but it cannot hurt you here, but we still need to do things careful with it. That's the level of kind of babying to make sure that people don't get hurt, because that's a very, very high priority thing on the vast majority of production sets. So they also have required breaks. So your lunch break, you also have multiple 15-minute breaks throughout the day, which are not difficult to get because the vast majority of jobs on set, unless you're like the first AD or second AD, first assistant director, second assistant director, basically the people that run the logistics of that day on set, unless you're one of those two people, you're not going to be working constantly. Director, DP, like those people will probably be working constantly. But if you're an actor, most of the day, you're not going to be working. There's a lot of setup and tear down. There's a lot of time between takes. There's a lot of just time where you get to chill because the camera's not recording. And for all the other people, where you're a gaffer, you're a grip, whatever, as soon as everything's all set up to start recording, they want you to leave. Like they don't want you anywhere around, because if you start making noise while they're recording stuff, they lose that take. They can't do anything with it. So you are given breaks basically the entire time that they're actually shooting each scene. So it's easy to get multiple breaks throughout the day. There is a lot of intense work throughout the day as well, and it is a long day, but it's not constant stress the whole time through. There's a pretty good chance that you'll get credit in the film. When the credits roll, your name will probably be in there. I'd say like a 50-50 chance. Depending on how high up you are in the hierarchy, there's a fairly good chance that your name will show up in the credits. When they call that's a wrap, that's the end of the day. Whether you're wrapping that day or you're wrapping for the film, when they say everybody needs to leave by this time, everybody needs to leave by that time. You are not allowed to stay late. You are not allowed to lollygag around. Again, union reps will enforce that people do not work insane overtime. Shoots rarely go more than 6 days in a row without at least one day off. So it's rare that you're working for 7 days straight. But shoots will generally go for, we'll say, 2 to 3 months. There might be a week off during that time. And then once that project is over, then you'll have to find another project to hop onto. Sometimes those are going to be really quick. Sometimes there's going to be a delay. Very similar to visual effects artists. The nice thing is with those on-set jobs is that you are face to face with the people that are making decisions whether or not you get hired back again. So you can get a feel for like, did they like me? Did they not like me? Do I think they're going to make another film anytime soon? Because I can talk with them about that. You can kind of anticipate whether or not your career is going to keep going on the up and up, or it's starting to go downhill based on the way that that production went. Also, looking at the pay rate. So an entry level gaffer, someone whose job it is to like set up tripods and lighting equipment, they're the ones that set up the equipment that you don't see in the camera. So lights that are off outside of the frame of what the camera shoots, the thing that actually holds the camera up, and any diffusers, which is like basically a big white sheet to make light softer. That's their main job. And they make about $500 to $600 a day for entry level. Visual effects artists, entry level, make $200 to $300 a day. So like about half. So even though our contracts are for about the same amount of time and we still have the same like up and down, they generally are making twice as much as us right off the bat. Let's get into a visual effects artist, the way that they're kind of treated. Start the day at 9 a.m., almost across the board, unless if it's remote, you might have more flexible hours. But if you're working for a studio where you're at the studio, you're going to be expected to be there at 9, with rare exceptions. Generally speaking, you don't get free meals. So no catered meals, unless, again, crazy, crazy hours for a really long period of time. You might get like a Friday meal. I know at one of the studios that I worked at, they would do that. They would do like a Friday or like a Wednesday meal. Maybe it was a Wednesday meal. They do like a Wednesday catered meal, not every meal like they do on set. And most studios have cereal and coffee, and that's it. As Mike already said, generally working 10-hour days, even during the slower periods. Unless it's a very slow period, then you're working 40-hour weeks, but 50-hour weeks is really common. 60 to 80, potentially even longer days do happen, particularly around crunch time. Sometimes crunch time can last for multiple months straight. And in extreme cases, artists can run into 20+ hour days. I mean, I already mentioned how I worked that 24-hour project. Mike knows about one of my horror stories. Through a series of terrible events, 63 hours later, finally got the project to the client. And by that point, I was almost completely incoherent. I could not look at anything for more than 2 seconds without my vision swimming. Like it looked like the walls were made of water because my vision was swimming so much. Thankfully, my wife at that point was there to drive me home because they didn't offer to drive me home. They offered to give me more and more and more coffee and energy drinks until I finished the project. And as soon as I finished it, they said, "Okay, you can go now." There was thank you for saving the day, but financial reimbursement for all of that extra time and actually kind of treating me as a human and a valued individual at the company, aside from a thank you, no, didn't happen. And it doesn't happen. That's kind of the thankless aspect of the visual effects industry. Other things, like we're not expected to do anything quote unquote dangerous aside from working insane amounts of hours for months on end. But because we are in rooms that have blackout curtains with bright screens where we have to nitpick individual pixels that are on the frame, artists in our field do tend to have eye problems, they tend to have back problems, they have very bad posture in general. There's definitely some concerns about hygiene in the industry because there's some people that they're like, whatever, I'm just going back to work anyway. And they're like, I don't really need to shower. It's gross. It's gross. But there's definitely a stench that develops in some of those studios after you've been working for a crazy amount of hours for a crazy amount of weeks. Breaks, as far as like 15-minute breaks, even lunch and dinner breaks, they're suggested, but they're kind of indirectly discouraged because there's always this understanding that we need to get these shots out now. So, and again, it is different from one studio to the next. Some studios are great about it, about making sure that people take care of themselves. Other studios that we call meat grinders are basically like, if you can eat at your desk, eat at your desk. Because that's more hours you can put in for us. And there's only so many hours in the day, and this work needs to get done. And we're really far behind. And they're always really far behind. And they're always understaffed. And they're always hiring people. They bring in new artists that are fresh out of school that don't have the self respect that more developed artists have. And they just need a job. They need a foot in the door to be able to develop a reel, to be able to develop the connections that they need to actually make it in the industry, and they'll take whatever to be able to do that. So then they work an insane amount of hours, and they basically just leave them. When everything dies down, they lay them off. And I would say probably 80% of those artists, that's their one and only job in the industry. They realize that it's just too much for them, and they leave it all together. They don't come back. Even the really talented artists, that happens too. So with other film industry jobs, you got about a 50-50 chance of getting your name in the credits. For VFX artists, I'd say a 1 in 20. I know that Mike was just commenting that he watched the new Willy Wonka movie, and one of the relatively big studios that worked on it didn't get a single artist listed in the credits. They only got the company name listed. Uh, this also happened a lot for another VFX studio that is at this point a relatively big one, Whiskey Tree. That happened to them all the time when they worked on Marvel movies and Disney movies. They wouldn't have a single name in the credits. It would just be their company logo, and that would be it. And it's really disappointing that all of those artists at those different studios, they don't have credits in the films. And the best that they have is credits on IMDb. For listeners, if you've never heard of this before, IMDb stands for Internet Movie Database. If you go to imdb.com, you can look up any movie you've ever seen, any TV show you've ever seen, probably any virtual reality project you've ever seen, and you can find a list of all the people that worked on that film, including extras, including visual effects artists that weren't credited in the film, including stunt actors that weren't credited in the film, body doubles, all of the roles that generally get left behind. Those are the ones that are at least credited on IMDb, as long as those individuals cared to put their names on there. Because that's the thing, is it's a crowdsourced website. So if somebody says they worked on a film and there's public knowledge that that studio that they were working for at that time worked on that film, even if that person didn't work on that film, it can still say that they worked on that film. And also there's no clarification for like a primary artist on a film as opposed to a temporary artist on a film. So I know some artists that would do an individual shot for a project, and even that didn't get fully approved, but it might have gotten internally approved. That was enough for them to get their name in the credits for at least one of the projects that I worked on. On the other hand, there might be an artist that worked on it for 5-6 months. Their name might not end up in the credits. Who knows? And there's no emphasis either way on IMDb. Definitely no emphasis when it comes to the credits for the film. When you end your day, that happens whenever your work is done, which doesn't actually happen. So you kind of feel the stress of needing to go back to work as soon as possible to get the work done, because you just have to get that one last shot out, or you have just a few notes left on this shot for your plate to be completely cleared during a project. That doesn't happen. It's a nice fantasy, but when projects are going, you're probably going to be thinking about what you have left to do on it, because it's just hard to distance yourself from, particularly when you're working hours like that. And as I mentioned, work days can kind of be endless as opposed to cut at 6 days in a row, because as Mike said, like seventh day pay is a thing if you're an employee, and depending on the company policies, because it's really just time and a half and overtime if you're an employee. If you're not an employee and you're a contract worker, then they can work you day and day and day and day and day, as many hours as possible, and they only have to pay you for your hourly rate or your day rate, whatever that happens to be. Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of situations where VFX artists just work themselves to the bone, and they are very likely to fall asleep at the wheel when they're doing those kind of hours. But yeah, also where other film industry professionals are able to talk with and see the reactions of decision makers on whether or not they're going to be hired back. Visual effects, that doesn't happen either. More often than not, nowadays we're going to be remote workers, but even when we weren't remote workers, generally there's going to be an HR department or a studio executive or supervisors that kind of determine whether or not you're going to be kept on or hired back. Um, they're also going to be very hush hush about what upcoming projects there are because of NDAs. They're not really allowed to talk about it very much. But when you're on the film side, like the production side, it's stuff that's not even in the works yet. It's stuff that the directors and the writers are thinking about. So you can know about it. But with post production, these things have generally already been shot or they're well along in production. So the non disclosure agreements are already well established. So you can't say anything about it. They're not allowed to tell you if work is coming up. And then, even if work is coming up, there's always a good chance that it can fall through, which I'll get to that as well, because that's a whole nother thing. So you don't know when you're going to be brought back to the same studio that you previously worked for, or if that's just going to be a short term stint. And it doesn't really matter how hard you work or how good you are at your job as far as working at that studio goes. Now, the one nice thing about working hard and doing a good job is that it is a relatively small industry and networking is so crucial in the visual effects industry that the people around you will see the quality of your work. The people around you will see the speed and efficiency of your work, your attitude while you're at work. And that is going to be where you get projects down the road. When people are like, hey, a studio I'm working for needs an artist. There's that one guy that did a really good job, that worked really fast, that was really smart, that was really friendly, really funny, kept everybody's morale up. That's the person they're going to suggest that studio reaches out to. So you don't have the decision makers one step removed. And you don't know if the people that you worked with that saw you doing a good job are going to continue in the industry because, as I said, there's a very high turnover in the industry as a whole. So that hard work may or may not pay off. And they might end up moving to another area where there's work because outsourcing, which, again, more things to discuss. But yeah, there's no guarantee. There's not even a hint of a guarantee that doing a good job, working hard, being the most efficient person on the floor is going to be rewarded. And that to a degree is leaning toward the more negative perception of our industry from those that are actually in our industry, at least, again, in my experience. But Mike, Martin, what do you guys have to say about that? I'm curious about your guys' take, what your experience has been, because sometimes it does go the other way too, but again, it seems like it's more rare.
Yeah, I think overall everything can be sort of a gamble. What I've noticed is like studios also want, as you mentioned before, like if you're friendly, if you're social, you try to get along with everyone, like the artists and everyone who works there. But there are times like if you're working, especially if you're freelancing and you're there for a short amount of time and you're trying to get stuff out because you want to show them what you can do, the hard work that you can put in. And that can also kind of be one of the situations where you might focus too much on the work and not socialize as much or be very talkative to everyone around you. And that could possibly be off-putting to some people because you're like, oh, like, what's this person's deal? All they're doing is working, or, they're not trying to get to know anyone. And I find that interesting because it is a double-edged sword there. You might put in all this work, but they might be like, oh, you know what? They weren't really that outgoing with the artists around here.
Yeah.
Maybe they're not a good fit.
Yeah, and culture fit is definitely a big thing too.
Yeah, it's definitely something that we experience a lot on our team. I just think about late nights when we're working really late trying to meet deadlines and we're all getting really stressed out or very tired and how much we lean on each other. The one thing that you always have to go back to and what keeps you going working those long hours is the fact that you make friends. This is the kind of stuff that all of you want to do, the kind of work you want to produce. and you have a lot of things in common, a lot of interests. And yeah, the camaraderie you build is something that really kind of gets us through a lot of hard times. And that's something we always fall back on. That's why you and I we know each other for, I don't know, has it been a decade now?
It's over a decade. It's like 12 years, 11 or 12 years. Yeah. Not to say that we've been through the same thing that anybody in the military has, but I do feel like there's at least a similarity there with people that have been in the military, where you have really long shifts, you have times where nothing's really happening, you have times where a lot is happening, and it's hard to even keep track. And you're in the trenches. I mean, you you forget what it's like outside of that environment. Again, what we experience is nothing in comparison, but I do think that there's at least parallels to be drawn.
Yeah, I think the state you put yourself mentally and physically, you're testing your limits.
Hmm.
I don't know. I think as much as it can be a drain, it can be taxing, I think it's something that other people can't really understand unless you're in it. At some point, that is our life, sure, 100%.
Hmm.
But it's also something that makes us want to get up in the morning and keep challenging ourselves. It's about how there's different positions in visual effects, but we've both been in situations where you're brought in for a project and it's on you to deliver the whole thing, like a one-man army. And some people love that situation. They love coming in and it becomes their project. Other people, it's too much. There's guys like pioneers we mentioned before from ILM who are still doing it today.
Yeah.
Guys who worked on Jurassic Park and all these monumental, amazing films because they come every day to work thinking, wow, what innovation am I going to be part of today? Groundbreaking thing that we're still doing today. I mean, Avatar still creates groundbreaking moments and new technology that other people then use and
Mhm.
share that knowledge. So as much as we painting it as a next Halloween horror film, as much as it may come across that way, we all went to vocational schools that tried to prepare us for the industry.
Hmm.
One of my teachers would always bring up the fact that don't do this for the money, do this because this is your passion and what you really want to do for a living.
Hmm.
He was very serious when he told us that, and we were all looking at each other like, dude, what's the deal? It's just a job. But it's more than just a job like working at a fast food spot or something. It's a career.
Yeah.
We mentioned earlier, most of us are freelancers now. So most of us work when the work's available. I know all of us have struggled due to the strikes that happened last year. We're all trying to ramp back up and we're all eagerly looking for work.
Hmm.
That's not the only reason why we're here on this podcast. We're also here because, we want to share our experiences. We want to, give our take on what's going on, not just socially, but also in terms of our industry and in terms of just life. Because this has been a huge part of our life. As much as we would joke that every time we worked on another huge project, that's like another year taken off our personal calendar. But
Yeah.
at the end of the day, we're like, what else would we rather do? We want to wake up every morning and continue to challenge ourselves. But with the unions that are forming, people are speaking out. We've had chance to spend more time with our families and friends and loved ones. As much as we like doing this work, we do want to have a little bit more of a work-life balance.
Yeah.
That's why we want to dedicate a whole other segment talking about the development of these unions coming up because it's huge, it's important. Hearing our testimonies and getting a rough idea of the regular workday for a visual effects artist, you can see, okay, yeah, maybe it is time that things do change. Yeah, I've worked at a lot of different studios where visual effects artists would do the most and not have really any pushback, not really set any demands. This is why it may be shocking for people to hear us speak about this, thinking that, oh, visual effects artists, like, what's the big deal?
Yeah.
A lot of them are kind of humble. A lot of them take it on the chin and keep it moving. A lot of us, well, I mean, don't publicly complain about our jobs, but
Well, and I think that's kind of one of the things too is our industry is inherently humble
yeah,
because we don't work as an individual for the vast majority of projects that we work on. We work as part of a team. So even saying like, hey, I worked on that shot, it's like, well, I didn't do everything you see on that shot. I did like this aspect of what you see on that shot. And especially if it's an impressive shot, like stuff that looks really cool that you're like, wow, how did you do that? Well, I did that as part of a team of 10, 15, 20 different people for that one individual shot. We all used our expertise to get that to look that good. And you look at actors, it's the exact opposite. Actors inherently want the attention put on them. That's not to say anything about the individual people that choose acting as a career. It's just that's the way that job is structured. The attention is put on you. You have to perform as an individual with the attention on you. For us, we're in the background inherently. And then we're not even in the background inherently, like a gaffer or a grip. We're in the background. We're not even on set. We are in post production. And even in post production, we're not working directly for these big production companies. We're working for smaller VFX studios that are working for the production companies. And we're not even working for that. Like, there's so many layers that separate us from being on screen that we don't even, well, I mean, I'm sure some of us do, but I feel like a lot of visual effects artists like don't even think about the fact that we're working on something that happened on set. Like there's such a disconnect from the footage that we receive and realizing that like we could have been on set experiencing that because we are working on that project. But there really are only a handful of people that are in the visual effects field that were on set supervising the way that things were done to make it easier once it got into post. So it's all very much structured so that people kind of forget about us. And on top of that, invisible visual effects, which we'll get into this a lot more once we talk about the there's no CG argument that a lot of people use for their films. But invisible visual effects is our primary role. If there's not magic that's happening where we want it to look really cool and interesting and bizarre, where colors are swirling around the screen or there's a portal opening to another dimension or whatever. If it's not something like that, our work is invisible inherently because the whole point is that we want to further the story. We don't want to pull you out of the story by looking at what we do. So, for instance, you'll see things for a number of TV shows, a large number of TV shows and even feature films where you would have no idea that there's any visual effects in that shot. But then you break it down and you're like, oh, that person was shot on a green screen. They're not actually in the middle of New York City crashing through a bus stop. That's a person on a green screen with a bus stop that doesn't even have glass in it. And everything was shot as a separate plate, and the camera was just moved in exactly the same way between the two plates so that they didn't have to have broken glass on the sidewalk in New York City. It's that kind of decision making that happens in production that translates to us doing work in post production that never gets recognized by anyone that's ever seen the stuff. If you don't know exactly what to look for and have experience with it and potentially even like know something about the behind the scenes on the project, you're going to have no idea that there's visual effects in these shots. Like a bunch of set extensions, no one would have ever guessed a lot of the set extensions that I've done because they're seamless. That's my job, is to make them seamless. But otherwise, oh, this guy's walking around with a blue screen outside of his windows, like, and it's a subtle thing, but it adds so much to the project, and it's a thankless career by design almost. So because we are people that go into this industry that understand that to start off with, I think it's important for us to go out of our comfort zone to call attention to the way that we're treated and to try to better that situation as well, because that's not in our nature as a group, as a community of visual effects artists. It's not in our nature to say, hey, we deserve better than this. And we need you to pay attention to us to recognize what we actually deserve. And then we can start talking about what we can give back to you now that we have established what is necessary for us to be able to just continue in this industry. We're not even asking for things because we're like, hey, we want to be treated better. We're asking for things because this entire industry is flipping. And on top of that, we're now dealing with AI. And on top of that, we're dealing with the strikes. And on top of that, we're dealing with the pandemic. Like, there's so many layers on layers on layers of things that have been happening lately that have completely changed the industry, that have made it to where we don't even know that the industry is still going to exist in 5 years' time. So we want to make sure that we still have jobs, because that's another thing that kind of touches on what you were talking about before, but the way that we are kind of all in for our career. Because I hate to say it, I don't have the passion and enthusiasm that I once did.
Oh my God, Jim.
Right? I mean, I'm sure you can tell by a lot of what probably sounds like complaining, but I'm really just recognizing facts. Is that I recognize how flawed this industry is. And I have a family. As I mentioned in our first episode, I have 2 kids. I'm married. I have people to take care of. I have time I would like to spend with them. I would like to have enough money to be able to do things with them and to have a roof over my head and be able to get groceries.
Mm-hmm.
That is apparently a tall order nowadays. But the thing is, with our industry, it does not translate to any other industry. Like, if you're a painter and you paint portraits for a living, like, you might think it's beneath you to paint a house, but those skill sets, like how to blend colors, how to evenly paint things, those skills still translate. And a sculptor, or like, a sculptor can still use those techniques to, I don't know, do landscaping work and do carpentry, like things that are still artistic, but maybe less artistic than what they would ideally like to do. Something that is more utilitarian. But for us, there is no more utilitarian thing for what we do. I mean, we could get into graphic design, which is slightly more utilitarian, but it's also a completely different skill set than what we have, even though it's using some of the same software. But there isn't really anything for us to go into that uses the skills that we've been developing for years and years and years, that pays even remotely anywhere around what we're currently making, which what we're currently making isn't amazing for the most part, but it's not bad. It's definitely beyond an entry level employee in pretty much any industry. But when we're at 10 years of experience, 10 years of experience in almost any other industry would have probably made us more yearly to be able to be better off. But that's why I'm actually seeing a lot of artists getting into the production side of things, because a lot of artists are recognizing that producers get paid more than artists for a lot less stress, for a lot less of negative feedback where people are telling you what you did wrong, and that's the primary feedback you get day in and day out. And that's a transferable skill set. Like, production work is project management work. Project management work literally applies to every single industry, because every single industry has the person who does the work and then the person who runs the business. And very, very, very rarely are those the same people. And if the person who runs the business just wants to, like, own and run the business, then there's got to be a middleman there. There's got to be somebody who runs the team who does the work, while they answer to the person running the business who just focuses on the business side of things, as opposed to the individual tasks that the business does. So if you can learn project management skills where you're organizing things, where you're tracking things, figuring out actuals, figuring out return on investment, like those types of things, and like even production schedules and all those things. If you can start to understand those things and then prove that you have capability with those things.
And with that, that concludes our segment for this week. Please tune in as we continue to talk about the visual effects industry and unpack more details that the public doesn't really know about. All right, take care.